The Democratic Republic of the Congo, located at the heart of Africa, is world famous for its rich resources and the lowest per capita GDP globally. However, what has made it more well-known is a highly virulent infectious disease. The name of this virus is Ebola. Before the emergence of COVID-19, it was considered one of the infectious diseases most likely to trigger a global pandemic at the present stage. Among these diseases, with a fatality rate of 90%, it was classified as a virus with the highest level biological hazard and the highest grade bioterror attack weapon, and became the focus of global prevention. Many families have been completely wiped out due to infection with it. Ebola patients often die in a hideous way. Blood flows out from any orifice on the body, including the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, anus, gums, and even the genitals. The skin develops large ecchymoses due to subcutaneous bleeding, and the internal organs keep dissolving. People seem to be melting. We can't help but ask, what on earth is Ebola? How does it kill and spread? Will it sweep across the globe and massacre all living things? And how should we prevent and treat it? Internationally, infectious microorganisms are classified into 4 levels according to their degree of danger. Levels 1 and 2 are relatively weak, so we'll directly skip them. Level 3 refers to microorganisms that can infect humans or animals and cause serious diseases, such as the plague bacillus, Bacillus anthracis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and the HIV virus. Fortunately, with the development of modern medicine, there are already preventive and treatment measures for these pathogens. Level 4. Dangerous microorganisms refer to those that can not only cause serious diseases in humans or animals, but also have the opportunity to cause mass transmission currently, and there are still no effective treatment methods so far. All members of the Ebola family, the protagonist of today, are in this category. They are studied in Level 4 biosafety laboratories, which are the highest level biosafety laboratories, and are also known as the Ebola Suite. On July 6, 1976, in the warehouse of a cotton processing factory in southern Sudan, the warehouse manager YG was found dead on a hammock in the yard. Blood was flowing from his 7 orifices, and his appearance was extremely terrifying. Soon after, his colleague PG also started to have unexplained bleeding and shock. Different from YG's quietness, PG was a well-known socialite. He had had physical contact with many women in the town in exchange for money, and was also enthusiastic about organizing dances and parties. As a result, the epidemic spread rapidly in the town, and then to other cities. Most of the infected people died in this epidemic, and the fatality rate was almost comparable to that of the Black Death in the Middle Ages. Almost at the same time, in a hospital in a small village called Yambuku in northern Zaire, now the well-known northern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a patient named ML, who had a high fever, was admitted. The medical level in Africa is relatively backward. Feverish patients are usually only diagnosed with one of 3 diseases, malaria. After the diagnosis, nurses would use the same syringe to inject quinine into hundreds of patients until the needle became dull. A few days after receiving the injection, ML began to vomit, have diarrhea, and bleed continuously. The needle that had been used to inject him had already been used on hundreds of other people. After ML's death, his relatives held a grand funeral for him. According to local customs, they had to wash the body of the deceased and touch and kiss the corpse, which symbolized that the family was together. Before long, 21 of his relatives, including his mother, were successively infected, and 19 of them died. The hospital where he had been treated had long become a living hell. The patients were like virus spraying machines, and the unprotected medical staff were quickly overwhelmed. The first nun to be affected was a midwife. The pregnant woman she was delivering was dying of Ebola infection. The virus infected the baby through the placenta, and the fetus died before birth. When the nun delivered the stillborn baby, her hands were covered in virus-contaminated blood, and she died of Ebola infection 5 days later. In this way, the virus not only massacred the nursing staff in the hospital, but also affected all 55 villages around the hospital. A total of 318 people were infected, and 280 died. The fatality rate reached a terrifying 88%, almost a 1 in 10 chance of survival. Such high lethality actually does not conform to the survival interests of the virus. The best result is to coexist with humans. However, if the virus is contagious enough to spread rapidly from one host to another, or if there is a large enough population, then the lives and deaths of the infected are insignificant to it. In order to quickly figure out this unknown pathogen, doctors collected the blood sample of one of the infected patients and promptly airlifted it to multiple laboratories in Europe and the United States. A 27-year-old scientist named Peter Piot and his colleagues isolated the culprit of this epidemic from the blood sample. It was a filovirus shaped like a Rui scepter. They thus obtained the exclusive naming right for the virus. Since the epidemic occurred in Yambuku, Zaire, it should have been named the Yambuku virus. However, to avoid stigmatizing Yambuku, they named the virus after a river near the village. The name of this river is Ebola. Through day-after-day research later, people finally understood the pathogenic mechanism and transmission mode of the Ebola virus. Generally speaking, most pathogens cannot escape the encirclement and suppression of the immune system after infecting cells. However, it's coincidental that the Ebola virus attacks the immune system first. Some experienced people may quickly think of AIDS. But sorry, compared with Ebola, HIV is like a junior. HIV stealthily attacks the CD4 T lymphocytes in the human body, which is equivalent to eliminating the scouts of the immune system and paralyzing its intelligence system. In contrast, Ebola launches an indiscriminate and carpet-bombing attack on the immune forces of the human body. What takes HIV 10 years, the Ebola virus can achieve in just 10 days. As is well known, dendritic cells are equivalent to the command center of the immune system. When a pathogen invades, they activate the body's defense system, notify immune cells and antibody, producing factories to operate efficiently and eliminate the infection within a few days. When the Ebola virus invades the human body, it takes over the dendritic cells immediately, paralyzes their command system, and sends wrong instructions to related immune cells, making it difficult for them to defend effectively. At the same time, it uses the resources inside the cells to replicate in large numbers and build its own virus-producing factories. It also releases a large number of interfering proteins, using a viral protein as bait to neutralize the antibodies produced by immune cells and evade the attack of the immune system. It also invades immune cells such as natural killer cells, macrophages, and monocytes simultaneously, throwing the immune system into complete chaos. It should be noted that the Ebola virus attacks immune cells first, but it doesn't only target immune cells. While attacking the body's defenses, the Ebola virus can also infect most cells in the human body wantonly. At this time, some immune cells start to attack indiscriminately, further damaging blood vessels and organs. Arteries, veins, and capillaries may all rupture, causing massive internal bleeding. Patients begin to have fevers and bleeding. Blood volume decreases. Blood coagulation becomes abnormal, resulting in insufficient blood and oxygen supply to organs. In severe cases, patients may experience hypovolemic shock, multiple organ failure, and even death. As cells die in large numbers, the human body finally resorts to its last-ditch effort, the cytokine storm. This makes the desperate immune system enter an extremely frenzied state, using all available weapons to wipe out the invading enemies at all costs, even if the cost is oneself. This suicidal counter-attack has a certain chance of success, but it also comes at a great cost. Even if a patient is lucky enough to survive, their quality of life will be greatly reduced. Headaches, muscle pain, neurological disorders, and memory loss are just minor issues. There may also be sequelae, such as orchitis and amenorrhea. Moreover, the virus can remain in the bodies of these survivors. A male patient's semen was still infectious 82 days after infection. Therefore, we must emphasize the importance of using condoms again. The good news is that the transmission mode of highly virulent viruses is relatively limited. They can only spread through the body fluids of infected or deceased people, such as blood, sweat, mucus, saliva, semen, urine, breast milk, amniotic fluid, vomit, and feces. The bad news is that the Ebola virus is not static. The two Ebola outbreaks in Zaire and Sudan in 1976 were later determined to be caused by two different strains of the virus. Scientists named them the Zaire strain and the Sudan strain. More than a decade later, a third strain emerged. In 1989, the Reston Primate Quarantine Center in Virginia received long-tailed macaques from the Philippines for medical experiments. In just 1 month, 29 monkeys died one after another. Unlike mice, monkeys are relatively expensive experimental animals. They are difficult to obtain, troublesome to transport, and require careful care by professionals. The continuous deaths indicated that there was an infectious disease in the monkey group, which alerted the quarantine staff. Further observation revealed that the dead monkeys had symptoms of hemorrhagic fever. The United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases rushed to the scene, killed all the remaining monkeys in the center, carried out a comprehensive disinfection of the center, and demolished and rebuilt the buildings. After dissecting the feverish monkeys, it was found that the culprit was the Ebola virus, and it was a third strain different from the Zaire and Sudan strains. It was named the Reston Ebola virus. Subsequently, the military took samples from 178 animal keepers. 6 of the staff members had antibodies to this virus in their blood, indicating that they had been infected. 5 of them had no history of injury or injection. Some experts believed that this type of virus could be transmitted through the air. Fortunately, although the Reston strain has a high fatality rate for monkeys, it is not fatal to humans, at least for now. By 2013, although the Ebola virus had developed 6 different subtypes and African countries had suffered repeated heavy blows, no public institutions or pharmaceutical companies were willing to develop vaccines. The reason was simple. The virus only prevailed in Africa, and small African countries like the Congo, Gabon, and Sudan couldn't afford to research vaccines or drugs. So some people said that it would take dozens of white victims for the Ebola virus to be conquered. But it turned out that this was not the case. Not that many were needed. At the end of 2013, in a remote village in Guinea, West Africa, Ebola killed a 2-year-old boy. A few days later, his family members also started to die one after another. The village held a funeral for them. According to the local custom, people needed to touch the corpse. As a result, half of the mourners lost their lives. Then it was the turn of the medical staff who took care of them. And then the mourners of the medical staff. The number of deaths and infections climbed at an incredible speed. By the time the Guinean authorities acknowledged the Ebola epidemic, the virus had already invaded neighboring Sierra Leone and Liberia. Due to the extremely backward local medical conditions, many people believed in witch doctors. The most famous witch doctor among them was MD from Sierra Leone. Perhaps it was because doctors couldn't cure themselves. He unfortunately died of Ebola while treating patients. MD's funeral was very grand. His followers came from various regions of Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia to pay their respects. According to the usual practice, they needed to touch the corpse to show that they were with the witch doctor. 6 months later, the capitals of the 3 countries all fell. On August 8, 2014, the World Health Organization announced that it would raise the alert level of this epidemic to the highest level and classify it as a public health emergency of international concern. As the number of deaths soared, conspiracy theories as terrifying as the pandemic also began to spread. Local people were afraid to go to the hospital even if they were infected, because they thought that few people who were sent to the hospital could come back alive. They believed that white people were using them for human experiments, or stealing their organs for sale, or that there was no Ebola virus at all, and it was the white people in protective suits who were killing West Africans. Rumors and misunderstandings spread like wildfire, resulting in 8 aid workers being beaten to death by local residents. The Ebola virus also thrived in the estrangement and suspicion among humans, eventually infecting 28,652 people and killing 11,325. Among these deceased, one person set off a media frenzy in the United States, and thus changed the global situation of Ebola. In September 2014, a Liberian young man named Duncan went to the United States to visit relatives. When questioned by security inspectors, he concealed the fact that he had contact with Ebola-infected people. 2 unprotected American nurses were thus infected. This was the first time Ebola had infected humans outside Africa. Since then, the West has changed its previous casual attitude and invested in Ebola research at an unprecedented speed, because they finally realized that there was only the distance of a flight between civilization and the virus. Dangerous viruses from the tropical rainforest could reach any city on Earth except Greenland by plane within 24 hours. As early as 2005, scientists had verified the feasibility of an Ebola virus vaccine, using the vesicular stomatitis virus as a vector in non-human primates. That is, the protein on the surface of the Ebola virus was loaded onto the surface of the non-toxic vesicular stomatitis virus, and the vector was used to induce an immune response in the human body. Until 2014, no Ebola vaccine could leave the laboratory. It was not until the Ebola virus triggered an outbreak in West Africa and took a trip in European and American countries that vaccines were put into clinical trials at an unprecedented speed, expanding from 3 to 20 research institutions. Among them, Merck's recombinant viral vector vaccine against the Zaire strain of the Ebola virus achieved great success. Among the first 93,965 people vaccinated in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the effectiveness rate was 97.5%. In November 2019, this Ebola vaccine obtained marketing approval, becoming the world's first officially approved Ebola vaccine, and setting a new record for the fastest pre-qualification review of a vaccine by the World Health Organization. We now know the transmission route of Ebola, understand its pathogenic mechanism, and have developed a vaccine against its most lethal subtype. No large-scale epidemic has occurred in countries outside Africa. Normally, we should be able to relax. Then why are thousands of medical staff still flocking to Africa? Because the genes of the Ebola virus are not very stable. This means that as long as it infects enough people and produces enough mutations, there is a chance that a supreme killing weapon, with both lethality and transmissibility, will be born. Of course, we don't have to worry too much, because there are many such potential pathogens in nature. With the deforestation of the tropical rainforest, the living space of animals is constantly shrinking. The pathogens they carry also have more interactions with humans. Coupled with the generally backward medical conditions in Africa and other places, and the growing crowding of the population, the probability of hatching new virus strains with the ability to cause a global pandemic is getting higher and higher. When the Ebola epidemic spread in West Africa in 2014, Chen Wei, an academician of the Chinese Academy of Engineering, led a team to go to the African epidemic area to conduct clinical trials of the Ebola vaccine. Later, it became the world's first new genotype Ebola vaccine. In the current context of globalization, no country can stay out of a major pandemic. In the early stage of an epidemic, if we can work together and intervene in a timely and effective manner, the probability of a pandemic can be greatly reduced. Therefore, the World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, and medical workers from various countries, regardless of their own safety, rushed to the epidemic area to save helpless patients and extinguish the spreading flames, building a flesh and blood wall for the safety of people all over the world. 700 years ago, a group of plague doctors, with strange costumes and not so proficient medical skills, stood up from the ruins in despair, going against the current with nothing. 700 years later, a group of fully equipped professional doctors, knowing what they were about to face, charged forward one after another for the common destiny of humanity, without hesitation. Everything seems to have changed, and everything seems to have remained the same.